Central Command says 2 soldiers have been killed in Iranian strikes on Jordan. In a statement, CENTCOM said on Friday 2 U.S. service members in Jordan were killed in action as CENTCOM and partner forces defended against Iranian ballistic missile and drone attacks. Additionally, 1 service member is currently missing in action. 4 American service members were medically evacuated to Jordanian hospitals. They've since been discharged. Now, this footage was recorded in Jordan on Saturday morning, appearing to show smoke rising from the Al Mufaq Salti air base after a night of Iranian strikes in the area. NASA sites picked up a massive heat spike in the area on Friday into Saturday morning. CENTCOM has not confirmed where in Jordan the 2 service personnel were killed. Now, Al Jazeera's got correspondents covering this story in the United States and the Gulf region. In a moment, we're going to be live in Doha with Hamza Mohammed and in Tehran with Tawhid Asadi. But first of all, we're going to go to the U.S. Capitol, Washington, and Heidi Jo Castro. Heidi, what more do we know about these U.S. service members who were killed on Friday in Jordan?
Well, their names have not been released, which is following protocol. That doesn't happen until 24 hours after their next of kin has been notified. And officially, really nothing more has been released about this attack besides what you just read from CENTCOM. But according to reports in the U.S. media, this attack appeared to have happened on the U.S. base in Azraq in Jordan, where days earlier, 20 additional U.S. personnel had been wounded in another retaliatory strike from Iran. Now, regarding these 2 U.S. service members who were killed on Friday, Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, had a quick statement on that, saying their sacrifice only stiffens our resolve, which of course now begs the question how the U.S. may respond for this escalation from Iran. We're already seeing 7 days of continuous strikes on Iranian military targets that CENTCOM has described as infrastructure, communication. Now, it has not confirmed strikes on a desalination plant or on bridges, but certainly U.S. President Donald Trump has indicated that was his plan, wanting to escalate and attack those infrastructure type targets. And now we're waiting to see whether there will be a further response.
And as far as the way it's going to affect the Americans' view Trump's war in Iran, are you able to get a sense of how people are likely to react to what's been going on?
Right, seeing U.S. service members killed in action is the worst type of image for Americans to see on their television screens. And now this brings the military death toll of U.S. forces to 16 from this conflict, which is very detrimental to the U.S. Perception of it, given already the unpopularity of this war, with gas prices still high at home and President Trump's approval rating still at under 40%, with many attributing to his handling of the war. For that reason, this is not going the way that the president wants, especially with congressional elections coming up in November, in which his political party, the Republicans, are fearful that they'll pay the price from voter blowback.
Heidi, thank you very much indeed. Heidi Jo Castro there in Washington, D.C. Well, Iran's supreme leader says the U.S. president's signature is worthless and invalid. Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei has released a written statement saying that Washington has repeatedly breached the Memorandum of Understanding. He says Iran and the Resistance Front have unforgettable lessons in store for the U.S. We're going to cross to Tawhid Asadi. He's joining us live from Tehran. So what has Iran's leadership been saying, Tawhid?
Well, in this statement, we've got 3 important messages, 2 to the Americans and another domestic message. First, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei came out to say that the repeated violation of the Memorandum of Understanding by the Americans, which he called the Great Satan, is indicative of what he called a fact that the U.S. president's signature is not reliable in that regard. And that is coming also in the context that Iranians are talking about this cloud of mistrust that is out there when it comes to potentiality of any rapprochement, any negotiated settlement with Washington. And the context in that regard is that we've got at least 2 wars happening while the country was in the middle of negotiations. Meanwhile, the Iranian Supreme Leader also sent a message of warning, saying that in case the Americans decide to continue the war, there are going to be repercussions, something he called lessons, unforgettable lessons for the Americans by Iranians, and also the access of the resistance, something that he is trying to depict as a way to flex Iranian muscles in this complicated situation. And last but not the least, he came out to put emphasis on a call for unity at home, and that is critically important as we see a sort of rally around the flag impact in the course of past couple of days following this new round of escalation.
Doid, stay with me for a second. I want to just bring our viewers up to date with what's been happening over the last several days or so. The U.S. has been attacking Iran nightly for a week now. They've mainly been hitting Iran's southern coastal provinces, including Kharg and Qasem Islands. Now, over the last 48 hours, strikes have been focused on Hormuzgan province, and there, Iran says bridges and railway facilities and an airport have been hit, and those attacks have disrupted or cut off these vital transportation routes connecting Iran's key port city of Bandar Abbas to other inland cities, like the city of Lar in Fars province. Now, it was hit for the first time last night, and so was the central province of Yazd, as it appears that the U.S. may expand their strikes. We're going to go back to Tawhid Asadi now. So how are these strikes impacting the daily lives of Iranians, Tawhid?
Well, indeed, it's a mixture of different sentiments that we see when it comes to the impact of war on daily lives and ordinary citizens. We know that the public mood is highlighted by a sort of anger over this continued airstrikes by the Americans, as it goes without saying that it is not just the military sites or state buildings being impacted, not only in this war, but also in the past 40-day and 12-day wars that we had. Civilians felt the impact as they saw very residential areas being impacted, and in the past days we saw residential neighborhoods. For example, in Tape Allah Akbar in Hormuzgan province, we saw an attack as a result of which people were killed and injured. Also, we know that the public mood is all highlighted by this sense of frustration as a result of the uncertainty that exists pertaining to the future, and they are not really sure whether this confrontation is going to persist or diplomacy can pave the way for a settlement at the end of the day. And we also know that regardless of this rally around the flag impact that we see and the nightly gatherings that we see across different cities, including here in the capital, there is this economic pressure that is putting a lot of burden upon the pockets and shoulders of ordinary citizens. We know that as a result of war, as a result of years of sanctions and also domestic mismanagement, Iran is dealing with an economically deteriorated situation, and that is something that people had hope initially when this memorandum of understanding was signed, that diplomatic engagement could settle down some of these economic issues, as the discussions there were revolving around the removal of sanctions as well. But right now, I can say what remains the name of the game is uncertainty.
Tawhid Asadi there talking to us from Tehran. I want to go to Hamza Mohammed now in Doha. Central to all of this, of course, is the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi television is saying that there is a joint statement from the European Union and Gulf countries. It says that they won't accept illegitimate claims of sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Just talk to us about what's being said in this statement.
Well, as you mentioned, Iran has effectively shut the Strait of Hormuz, and the EU and the GCC countries are quite unhappy with that. The reason for that is because the countries in this region, the GCC, they're heavily reliant on the export of energy, oil and gas. Most of that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. And for the EU, the European countries, 10% of their energy supplies comes from this region. So with the Strait of Hormuz closed, they are feeling the economic pressure. The Strait of Hormuz has been one of the main sticking points in the negotiations between the US and Iran. Iran has made it very clear for the ships passing through that passage, they have to get approval from them. They have to go through a route that they have approved. They also want to charge fees for those ships passing through. They say that those fees would pay for the damage caused by Israel and US strikes on Iran. The Europeans and the GCC countries are quite unhappy, and they came up with these statements. Let me read you part of the statement. They say the passage through the Strait of Hormuz is guaranteed under international law. They go on to say we reject claims of sovereignty and control over the Strait of Hormuz by any state and imposition of any permit systems, transit fees or service charges. This is the statement that they have come out with. Iran seems not to be blinking. They are very adamant that any ship that wants to pass through this Strait of Hormuz, they have to have approval from Tehran. They also want those fees. The world economy is failing. Energy supplies are dwindling. Prices are going up. Another point worth noting is for fertilizer, for the global fertilizers, about half of it, the nitrogen-based fertilizers, comes from this region, and it goes to European countries for farmers. So they, in Europe, they're not just feeling the energy prices at the price pumps there, but they're also feeling in the farms and in their kitchens. So that's the reason why they came out with this statement. But for Iran, they want money and they want approval for any ship that passes through the strait.
Bringing us up to speed there from Doha, that's Hamza Mohammed. Hamza, thank you very much indeed. Well, the latest casualties in Jordan bring the total number of U.S. soldiers killed in action during the conflict to 16. That figure includes 13 service members killed during the opening stages of the war in March, one Navy pilot killed in a non-hostile helicopter crash in the Arabian Sea on July the 1st, and 2 service members killed in a missile strike in Jordan on Friday. The number of injured stands at more than 400 U.S. troops since the conflict began in February. The majority of those involve traumatic brain injuries from drone and missile strikes. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by David DeRoche. He's a former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. He's now professor at the Thayer Marshall Institute. He's joining us live from Washington, D.C. David, just in the last few minutes, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has posted on X. He says, Godspeed heroes, their sacrifice only stiffens our resolve, which immediately leads to the question, how do you think the U.S. is going to respond to this?
Well, I think that Donald Trump's enemies domestically, of which he has many, will cite it as further proof that that he went into the war without building a case for it, and now finds himself stuck. I think that it's more likely that Trump will respond in force. Right now, it appears that his military plan is to isolate the areas in the south to prevent it from receiving supplies, updated missiles, drones, whatever, and then to attack the areas in the south that are capable of attacking neutral civilian shipping. He probably will consider at least taking action directly against national level targets, command and control, and dual use infrastructure around Tehran and other places in the interior of Iran. I think there'll also probably be some renewed anti-force targeting, which mostly has only occurred in the south and at maritime capabilities and units.
As we know, every time you pull the trigger, there's always the risk that somebody is either going to get injured or killed. This, one would imagine, is a circumstance that Iran has calculated for. It is expecting some sort of response, perhaps the kind of which that you're discussing. Can you just talk to us about why you think Iran may have taken the action it did, knowing that it will probably provoke the response?
Well, so far, Iran missile barrages against the United States, have not been overwhelming. They haven't really met with much success. They've hit one. They've destroyed one AWACS aircraft, which for some inexplicable reason was parked in the open, and damaged some tanker aircraft. But we haven't seen a destroyed Joint Strike Fighter. It looks as though the missiles here hit a troop billeting area at Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. It's hard to say what their targeting logic is. I think it may be just they were lucky, and if they actually hit a billeting area, you would expect more than 3 casualties. This could be, for example, debris that just fell from a successful intercept. We don't really know. But I think that their attitude is they wanted to increase the pain calculus. But, one of the first rules of warfare is the enemy gets a vote too. So I think Trump will view this as an escalation. I think that he is looking for options to increase the pain threshold in response to this.
I want to ask you about the timing, if you like, of the CENTCOM announcement, because it is less than 24 hours or so since apparently these deaths took place. And as you referred to before, there are those within the United States who do not support this war, that they do not believe that Donald Trump has the legitimacy to be carrying out this war. At the same time, Pete Hegseth, in that post just a moment ago, was saying it's stiffening the resolve. There's going to be as you were talking about, a greater response. Why do you think that the CENTCOM decided to make this announcement at this time, given the fact that it could influence either way what happens next?
That's an excellent question. I'm actually glad you raised this. So the policy in the U.S. with news like this is, and I think it's smart, is that bad news doesn't get better with age. You want to release it as soon as possible, because otherwise the story becomes you're hiding it. But when it comes to deaths, the U.S. government doesn't announce it until it can notify the next of kin. And that's usually the reason for the lag. And quite frankly, they do it because they don't want reporters telling people that they're, telling parents that their son has died in combat. And there's a good, when we were in Afghanistan, we got rocketed, and I slept through the rocket attack. Everybody was in the bunker and said, "Oh my gosh, they got Major DeRoche." And somebody wanted to call my wife until another officer who knew me better said, "He snores like a train. He probably slept through it." And that avoided a disaster, you can just imagine. So the military has a very, very systematic way of notifying next of kin of the death. That takes a while, and they want to respect that. So, but once next of kin is notified, the press release goes out, or else the story becomes the military's hiding the deaths.
Donald Trump had already said that the memorandum of understanding was essentially dead in the water. It was null and void. We now have a statement from Iran saying, no, we're disregarding the memorandum of understanding. Did the memorandum of understanding actually create any sort of limitation on the military action that either side can take place? And by ripping it up, does that mean that Iran is now acknowledging, right, the gloves are off and anything is up for grabs?
Well, there was never any restraint shown on Iran's side. The concession made was made by the United States. And if you look at the contemporaneous reporting, the first step of it was the U.S. lifting the reciprocal blockade on Iran in exchange for Iran reinstating free navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, stopping interference with shipping. And then there was to be the 60 days to go over the nuclear issue, and then everything else in the MOU. And so the U.S. Did waive the sanctions, did lift the blockade. You will recall at the time, because I know you and I talked about it, that the Iranians portrayed that as an American surrender, and some Americans did as well. But we didn't see the reinstitution of free passage of neutral civilian ships through the strait. And I think that reflected the fact that there was not unanimity within the Iranian government. They didn't really agree on what their government had agreed to. So there never has been implementation of the free passage of ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And basically, this all started when Iran fired on 4 tankers last week. So, I think the gloves have never really been taken off. And certainly, though, President Trump, I think his attitude is, okay, we tried diplomacy, now we're going to try something else. And unfortunately, it's primarily from the air, which usually doesn't achieve the desired strategic effect unless there's a lot of destruction.
David, as always, we appreciate your expertise in this. David DeRoche, former Pentagon Director of Arabian Peninsula Affairs, now Professor